Imagine you're a writer who has lost absolutely everything, your family, friends, and even touch with society, until one day a little cat brings back the happiness you once had, giving your life a new purpose. This is the story of Subaru, an eccentric, misanthropic, and somewhat antisocial novelist who finds himself in a cafe having a meeting with his editor, Kawas. Kawas provides him with various literary works to help guide and inspire him for his next writing. Our main guy is overwhelmed by the crowd in the cafe. He leaves and buys flowers, heading to the cemetery for his parents. He ends by saying goodbye to his editor and leaves the cafeteria thanking him for the books. Calmer, he buys flowers for his parents at the cemetery. He recalls reading interrupted by kids, an annoying memory reminding him of his parents' love for. At that moment he remembers something from his childhood, precisely when he was reading a book, but he is interrupted by other children who wanted to ruin the ending of the book. A very tedious anecdote that still reminds him of his parents and the love they generated in him for reading. Subaru unwraps an offering, surprised by a stray cat lunging at the food. He studies the cat, suddenly inspired for his novel about a devilish cat with bright eyes. Inspired, Subaru adopts the cat. At home, he calls his boss. Kawas tells him to have the first chapter ready by month's end. The idea that came to his mind is about a devilish cat with glowing eyes that shine in the darkness of the night. Thanks to this idea, Subaru decides to adopt the cat. Subaru calls his boss. Kawas tells him to have the first chapter ready for review. Subaru watches his cat and realizes it's calling a stray cat. This inspires a new idea for his novel, a secret lair for the devilish cat. Subaru watches his cat, seeing what movements it makes, to which he notices that it is calling someone, another stray cat that is hidden under his house. Seeing this, he comes up with another brilliant idea for his novel, a secret lair for the demon cat. After that, the main guy begins writing when he hears best friend Hiroto sneaking into his house and raiding the fridge. Subaru, seeing him, scolds him for coming in without permission. Hiroto says he's been through a lot. He got his wallet stolen while abroad and had to figure out how to get back. And then there was a fire in the apartment above his, which left his whole place soaked. To top it all off, his parents couldn't help. After finishing his story, Hiroto notices the little cat, and he's shocked because he can't believe that his best friend, who's always been so grumpy, has a cat as a pet. To top it all off, his parents couldn't take him in. After finishing talking, Hiroto ends up noticing the kitten, which surprises him since he can't believe that his best friend, as unfriendly as ever, has a cat as a pet. In the end, after all this talk, Subaru ends up kicking him out of his house because he just couldn't take it anymore. Sometime later, our main guy receives several books about cats sent by his boss so he can use them as references. Seeing this, the main guy decides to call his editor because he doesn't like that his imagination is being limited. On the other end of the line, Kawas sounds a bit down and has no choice but to accept, so he hangs up the call. Subaru, on his part, decides to take a break from writing, watching his cat, who is also watching him from the doorway. As he follows it, he ends up stepping on some cat food that was left in the middle of the hallway. This ends up giving him a brilliant idea about cat traps for his book. When he throws it in the trash, the cat goes crazy digging through the garbage to get its food back. After all this incident, Subaru ends up thanking the cat for the ideas, as well as for its presence, which is the only thing he doesn't mind. The next day, the same thing happens again, so he decides to read the book he was given the day before, which says that the cat does this as a sign of respect towards its owner. Knowing this, he decides to ignore it for now since the deadline is approaching, and he needs to focus to get it done. All day long he has been bothered by both the cat and his boss. The cat has been scratching at the door like crazy, while his boss has been calling him in a panic. In the early morning, he decides to go check out the mess the cat is making, which has dragged all its food bowl around. To his surprise, Subaru ends up fainting from lack of sleep. Yuzen can't even get up off the floor because he's so exhausted. Before closing his eyes, he remembers that he hasn't finished the writing and finally passes out completely. The next day, he's woken up by his boss, who barged in because he wasn't answering his calls. Subaru opens up, confessing that he hasn't finished writing, but his boss says he's already read everything, and he even found the pages scattered on the floor, finishing what was already written on the computer. Subaru thinks he might have eaten his cat's food bowl, or maybe it's just a coincidence, so he asks his editor what the motivation is for someone else to bring him a plate of food. Because of this, Kuro replies that it's most likely that he just cares about him, but the best thing for the situation would be to talk to the cat. The boss leaves our main guy alone again. The cat recalls the previous night, staying for good food. It shared its food, noticing he wasn't eating. It even brought the bowl to his face. We learn Subaru ate the cat's food and wrote intensely. Once finished, he fell into a deep sleep. The cat helped by bringing food. Subaru ate the cat's food and wrote intensely while sleepwalking. After finishing, he fell into a deep sleep. Now, the cat says goodbye, but Subaru, confused, stumbles to the kitchen for food. Subaru ate the cat's food and wrote. He then fell asleep. The cat says goodbye. Subaru goes for food. The cat tries to get his attention. Subaru gives tuna to the cat. In the present, the cat approaches Subaru to say goodbye, but Subaru goes to the kitchen. The cat tries to get his attention. Subaru gives the excited cat a can of tuna. Later, Subaru tries to write, but his cat blocks him on the computer. Subaru pulls out a can of tunas to eat, but the cat starts fantasizing about it. Seeing how anxious the cat is, Subaru decides to give it to him so he can eat freely, which makes the cat stick around a little longer. Sometime later, our main guy needs to keep writing, but when he tries, he's blocked by his cat, which is sprawled out comfortably on the computer. He tries to move it and wake it up, but nothing works until he gets the idea to lure it with some food. So, he heads to the kitchen, only to realize that there's nothing left. He thinks about ordering it online, but since the computer is busy, he tries to do it on his phone. But the wait time is way too long. So, he ends up deciding to go out to the store to get food for his cat. He arrives at the supermarket feeling a lot of social anxiety, and when he gets to the aisle, he realizes there's no cat food. He's super nervous because he has no idea how to solve this problem. And as he leaves, he spots a pet store across the street. Upon entering the place, he quickly heads over to the cat food section, completely dazzled by the sheer number of options available for a simple animal. While he was thinking, he gets interrupted by the store clerk who tries to help him pick the best food for his cat. She asks him what the cat's name is and how old it is, but Subaru is totally taken aback, leading to a misunderstanding because he ends up answering as if she were asking about him instead of his cat. In the end, the clerk gives him 2 different flavor samples to let the little cat taste, and after hearing this, the main guy realizes the misunderstanding, blushing and feeling completely embarrassed. But he also notices that he hasn't been able to give the little cat a name since he doesn't think it's necessary. However, the clerk corrects him, saying that naming the cat is essential for vet visits, and since it lives with him, it should be considered family. Hearing that last word, the main guy gets all flustered and quickly bolts out of the store. Outside, he gets a call from his editor saying that the executives like the writing and asks if he has named the cat yet. This leads to our main guy getting scolded because he thought they were talking about his cat, when in reality, Kawase was referring to the cat that was the protagonist of the story he was writing. Meanwhile, Hiroto enters the main guy's house to drop off some food his mom made along with a note, but in the process, he accidentally scares the cat, which ends up running away from him. On the way home, Subaru keeps thinking about the situation, clarifying that he doesn't have any family since they've all gone away, and there's no remedy for that, nor can an animal be his family. When he gets home, he notices his fish swimming freely and gets to work, but when he needs a reference book and goes to look for it, he's startled by the cat hiding in the same box. Our main guy stares intently as he thinks of a name, and being a writer, he can't just decide on a whim since a name is defined by the character. So, in the end, he accepts that it's best to choose one and starts saying different names until the cat reacts. After a long afternoon, a memory hits Subaru's mind. He remembers being with his mom and his favorite book from back then, so he ends up calling the cat by the name of the protagonist from that book. He says out loud, Haru, causing the cat to respond, identifying itself by that name. Following this, the protagonist remembers the food, and as soon as it is shown, Haru rushes to eat it without thinking twice, but the cat is not satisfied, causing our protagonist to buy him food again. Meanwhile, Haru shares everything from his perspective, revealing that he takes his naps on the computer because it's so warm. When he gets cold, he decides to get up and finds Hiroto in the middle of the house, triggering a traumatic memory from his days as a stray cat. This causes him to hide from the human in a box, and while lying in his little box, he ends up falling asleep, dreaming of a family that fed him. They called him Haru, which is why he responded when our main guy called him that name, as it's a warm word for him. The cat ends up asking for more food, but seeing that our main guy leaves him alone at home, he gets really confused because he can't wrap his head around the idea of going out to buy food. It's a new day, and our main guy is having breakfast as usual, while Haru is all hyper, running around the room from one side to the other, even using the main guy as a trampoline. He keeps this up for a while until he ends up wrecking Subaru's parents' altar. Seeing this, the main guy gets really mad, so he ends up giving him a good scolding for his bad behavior. His editor calls to meet at a cafe. Cats meow, captivating Kawase, who decides to visit and hangs up. He reflects on his past, recalling childhood teasing for reading books. He felt comfortable with family. The doorbell rings. Kawase searches for the cats, but they're gone. He holds the meeting. Returning to his melancholy, the protagonist gazes at the portraits of his father with nostalgia, remembering his childhood when he was teased for isolating himself and just reading books. Yet, he didn't mind his family's presence at home. In fact, he felt comfortable with them. While he was deep in thought about the situation, he was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Kawase burst in, super excited, looking for the cats, but when he found out they had left, he felt a bit down. Still, he took the opportunity to hold the meeting they had planned. As they head to the room to discuss the work in more detail, the protagonist takes the opportunity to clarify that he doesn't like being surrounded by crowds, so it's better to meet in a quieter place. However, the editor ignores this, and as soon as he sees the protagonist's little cat, he becomes captivated. He asks for permission to touch it, but when he tries, Haru runs away and doesn't let him get close. The editor comes up with a brilliant idea. They'll meet at Subaru's house from now on to avoid crowds. But Kawase takes this very literally, visiting the protagonist under any excuse just to see the little cat, even buying toys for Haru. The situation wears on the protagonist. Kawase notices and explains he can't have a cat due to his wife's allergy, quelling the protagonist's desire. He suggests petting Haru, as he hasn't been. Kawase tries, gets scratched, and leaves dazed but understanding. He departs for a meeting, saying goodbye and mentioning a return tomorrow, which annoys the protagonist, but arguing is pointless. Just as Kawase tries to pet him, he ends up getting scratched on the face, which leaves him a bit dazed, but he understands the cat's situation. Kawase has to leave because he's running late for another meeting, so he excitedly says goodbye, mentioning that he'll come back again tomorrow, which annoys the protagonist, but he knows it's pointless to start a fight. Subaru, seeing tranquility, continues writing. He runs out of ink and, lacking spares, goes to his parents' room for more. While checking a shelf, the cat knocks books down. One is his mother's album, filled with memories of Subaru's interests from her travels. This reminds him of his parents' fatal car accident during a trip. While checking his shelf, the cat ends up knocking a few books to the floor. The protagonist notices that one of them is his mother's album, and with a bit of nostalgia, he decides to look through it, seeing that his mother kept a record of all the things that might have interested Subaru from her travels. This causes our protagonist to remember the death of his parents, who suffered a traffic accident in the middle of one of their trips. The most curious thing is that our protagonist rejected this invitation, causing immense pain for Subaru, as he could have stopped them or even spent more time with them. Our protagonist starts to cry, but he's comforted by Haru, who licks his tears to make him feel less alone in his sorrow. Subaru embraces the act of love and finally decides to pet him, creating a beautiful connection between the two. This is where we find out that the cat's behavior was caused by some spirits that were lingering around our protagonist, making the cat want to protect him. But to the cat's surprise, these spirits end up taking the form of our protagonist's parents, thanking the cat for looking after their son. After the commotion, the protagonist decides to go back to sleep, but he's woken up by Kawase, who looks really worried because he thought he had fainted again. Seeing Kawase's level of concern, Subaru invites him in, giving him the chance to feed Haru so that the little cat feels more comfortable with his presence. On a new morning, he's interrupted by his two biggest annoyances, his best friend Hiroto and his editor Kawase. Hiroto brings over some stew made by his mom, and Kawase comes to visit poor Haru, who just runs away from him. The three of them sit down to have breakfast, but Subaru isn't feeling very comfortable, to say the least. Breakfast goes on normally until the topic of the cat comes up, mentioning that it doesn't have a collar, which is really important for the cat's safety since it helps prevent it from being stolen. In the end, he gets pressured by his friends to head to the pet store. On this journey, he's accompanied by Hiroto, who doesn't have anything useful to do. When he arrives at the store, he's greeted by Nana, the manager, who calls him by name and asks how the cat is doing. Hiroto witnesses this, surprised that his friend has a female friend. Subaru tells her that she was able to name the cat, and the girl congratulates him. At that moment, Hiroto leaves him to figure things out on his own. Nana takes him to the necklace rack where she finds hundreds of options and proceeds to imagine Haru wearing the different options presented, choosing a red one with a bow in the process. The manager questions him a little about the cat, its sex, breed, as well as its possible age, and when it was time to pay, an old lady who was waiting in line tells the protagonist that the old lady has a slightly older cat in her arms. Subaru is really nervous since he's not used to talking to strangers, but to his surprise, he does quite well. The elderly woman talks to him about regular checkups for her cat, making the protagonist realize that he has never taken Haru to the vet, and he doesn't even know if she has the necessary vaccinations. Nana overhears this and scolds the protagonist, pointing out that visits to the vet are very important and necessary. She offers him a carrier since it's a requirement for transporting and being treated at any clinic. A few hours have passed, and the protagonist is at the vet with Haru. During the checkup, the vet points out that Haru is a bit overweight, recommending a diet even though she's not too far gone, since if this continues, she could face medical complications in the future. The vet takes the opportunity to recommend to the protagonist that he should gain a little more weight since he's too skinny to the point that his bones are showing, which annoys our protagonist a bit. At the reception, Subaru is eavesdropping on other people's conversations, and these chats give him the reason why the cat is overweight. Since Haru was adopted from the street, there is no control over her food intake, causing her to eat excessively, without any restraint. Finally, the protagonist is called by the reception to complete the checkout process. In the middle of the process, he notices that Haru is being bothered by a dog, which happens to be his neighbor's. Seeing this, the protagonist immediately pushes the dog away and runs off, feeling disgusted by all the unnecessary socializing he's done throughout the day. When he gets to his front door, all he wants to do is rest, but before he can open it, Nana surprises him by greeting him and asking how the vet visit went in his neighborhood. Taking advantage of the moment, he tries to ask her how to help Haru lose weight, but in the end, he hesitates because he doesn't think it's appropriate, so he just says goodbye since he doesn't want to bother Nana. The girl, on her part, doesn't seem bothered at all, even offering to help get Haru back to her optimal condition. After saying that, she waves goodbye with a smile and walks toward her house. Subaru tries to put the collar on Haru, bribing her with food to fasten it. The cat sees things differently. The vet visit was scary. The dog chat cleared her questions and calmed her. At home, she allows the collar to make her owner happy. On the other hand, the cat saw everything very differently. The vet visit was a total nightmare and even a bit scary for her, but the situation with the dog was just a nice chat, where the little pup cleared up all her questions about the place, helping her feel much calmer. When he gets home, he doesn't really like the idea of the collar, as he thinks it's a game, but he ends up allowing it just so he can see his owner happy. A new day has arrived, and in the morning, Nana visits our protagonist to keep the promise she made yesterday. She sits down to have some tea while they talk about Haru and how she'll get back to her ideal weight in no time. The girl starts with her recommendation, and the first step is to see how Subaru feeds the little cat. Our protagonist is scolded by Nana, saying he's serving Haru too much. She corrects him, saying he should feed her twice daily, since Haru will eat everything he puts in her bowl without control. She suggests using a plastic bottle for safe exercise. Put food in the bottle. It comes out slowly, feeding and exercising her as she chases it. Nana shows a new kitten, similar to Haru, like siblings. The trick is to put a little food inside the bottle, and it will come out slowly through a hole, serving a dual purpose, feeding the animal and getting her to exercise by chasing the bottle all around the house. Nana takes the opportunity to show off the transformation of her cat, which used to be like a little ball of fat covered in fur, more like a hamster, really, but now is much healthier and in shape. She also shows off a new kitten she just adopted, which looks a lot like Haru, almost as if they were siblings. The girl takes the opportunity to analyze it in detail, agreeing that they look like family. This last word triggers a memory in the protagonist, where his mother compares him to his father, since they look like twins and demonstrate the same qualities. When he looks at Haru, the protagonist thinks about how proud and happy his mother would be, since she loved every living being on the face of the earth. It's time to say goodbye, and Nana heads home, but she forgot something very important: her keys. His keys are in the living room, but there's a small problem. They're stuck to Haru. With no other option available, he decides to chase after her, holding Haru in his arms since he has no other way to contact her. When she finally catches up to her, she shows her the keys that were left behind and are stuck on Haru's paw, so the only option is to go get a tool to cut the keychain and free poor Haru's paw. Subaru decides to accompany the girl to her house to free Haru with her special nail clipper. Inside, Subaru sees Haru scolding another cat, confusing him and making him think there's a fight. Dana realizes it's just playful antics, normal among animals. The girl calls her cat, leaving Subaru speechless as Haru ignores him. Dana, upon seeing the situation, realizes that it wasn't anything serious and was just some playful antics between the two, something normal among different animals. The girl calls her cat. Haru ignores Subaru. Animals sense feelings, not words. Call Haru from the heart. The cat comes closer, letting him pet her. Nana tells him that even though animals may not fully understand what we say, they can grasp something much more important: our feelings. So, she suggests that the protagonist call Haru, but this time with a twist. He should do it from deep inside, from the bottom of his heart. When he tries, he actually succeeds, causing the little cat to come closer to his chest and let him pet her. From the cat's perspective, we can review what has happened throughout the day. Haru finds the girl very strange, as she distrusts her intentions. However, when she visits her apartment and sees her sister and how well taken care of she is, it makes her trust the girl and her abilities as a pet owner. She also takes the opportunity to scold her little sister for wandering off when they were fleeing from a flock of crows that were chasing them. Still, she is grateful to have been found by a kind-hearted person and to have an owner who loves her dearly. After this, we see how for the first time Haru actually listens to Subaru, and it's for a simple reason. She corrected her sister's behavior, explaining that Haru doesn't mean food, but that's her name. Because of this, Haru ends up responding to the protagonist's call and snuggles up against his chest. While they were chatting peacefully, the door swings open and a man walks in, intimidating Subaru, who thinks he's a creep that has snuck into his house. Before anything happens, Nana ends up saving him, first explaining to her brother who the protagonist is, and then introducing him by the name Yugo, her younger brother. Nana ends up forcing the guy to kneel down and apologize for his actions, justifying it by saying he looks and dresses like a weirdo, which indicated his motive to protect his little sister. The two sit down, feeling really uncomfortable, so much so that you can almost feel it in the air. While Nana looks for some scissors to cut the keychain, the protagonist observes Yugo, noticing that he's a good person just by the way he treats the little cat. The girl comes back with some scissors, and they manage to free poor Haru, who can finally walk normally again. After that, the girl decides to go make some tea for the three of them. While the boys are left alone, Yugo pulls out a magazine to talk about some stories they're publishing about a cat that reminds him a bit of Haru. The protagonist gets really nervous when he sees the magazine edition because it's the one where his writings are being published. Just when Yugo was passionately talking about the novel, his sister walks in, clarifying that she also reads it and loves that story. Subaru is feeling really nervous because for for the first time. He can see with his own eyes how his writings evoke emotions in people, reminding him of his childhood. The protagonist tries to explain, but the words just won't come out, so he prefers to run away rather than face the situation. This leaves Nana very worried, so she runs after him, catching up to him in the middle of the street. The girl, feeling very embarrassed, apologizes for what happened, defending her brother, saying that he's a good kid and was just trying to protect her. Nana thanks him for everything and asks to meet again another day, so Subaru agrees. On a somewhat chilly night, the protagonist walks home, feeling a bit thoughtful, but deep down he's happy thanks to Haru's company. Reflecting on the day from the cat's view, we see its bond with the older cat, who understands its struggles by looking into its eyes. The older cat assures Haru of safety at home and promises to protect her sister. Haru feels joy as she grasps the meaning of family, but then the protagonist decides to. Haru is happy as she understands the meaning of family, but then the protagonist heads home, leaving the little cat with a moral dilemma. The older cat says they are family and will meet again. On the way home, she remembers being abandoned with her sisters. They were saved by an older cat who taught them to survive. The older cat took them to her sanctuary to teach survival skills. On the way home, she remembers her whole life with her sisters who were abandoned in the middle of the street. They didn't know how to survive on their own, but they were taken in by a much older cat who taught them everything they needed to survive in this cruel world. The older cat takes them to her sanctuary to kick off their survival lessons so they can learn to live in their new reality. As the oldest, Haru has to protect the youngest, even making sure that two of them end up being adopted by a family from the park. Sometime later, the three remaining sisters were calm, but since Haru was the oldest, she had to go look for food, leaving her little sisters alone for a moment. When she returns, she finds a terrifying scene. Her sisters have been attacked, and one of them didn't survive the attack, while the other was never found. Back in the present, Haru finally understands that Subaru is her family and considers staying with him forever. The next day, our protagonist meets with his boss because they are in the process of creating the cover for Volume 1, so they need to choose a color that fits the work. While Subaru was deep in thought, he gets interrupted by a message from Kawas, who tells him that he needs to do a signing event because of the great reception from the audience. Different stores are interested in having the artist hold an event. The protagonist, upon hearing everything, doesn't think twice and refuses the proposal, as he wouldn't like to be in a situation that's not under his control. Just at that moment, Roto arrives with all his younger siblings who came just to bother. The kids kindly introduce themselves to Subaru, while Kawase is delighted by the children and their present. Hiroto explains that they have come looking for Haru as his siblings want to see and play with the little cat. They also introduce their other friend, Nagisa, whom Subaru already knows, remembering that she was a very whiny and annoying girl. The group of kids asks for permission to look for Haru, so Subaru agrees without any problem. Even Kawase is eager to go out in search of the cat, but Subaru reminds him that they need to keep working. She discourages the editor. They try to work, but Subaru notices that Kawase can't concentrate because he's thinking about Haru, so he decides to give him the day off to play with the little cat while he prepares some tea. When he was about to prepare it, he finds Hiroto in the kitchen checking his fridge, and seeing it empty, he decides to buy Chinese food for everyone present. Hiroto comes out of the kitchen asking everyone if they want to eat that, and everyone agrees. They start looking over the menu while Subaru continues in the kitchen preparing things, but he enters an existential crisis because he has never dealt with kids before, let alone had such a large number of people in his house. In the end, ignoring all those thoughts, he starts looking for the tea set his mother had been keeping. At that moment, they arrive at Giza to help him make the tea, asking if he has any book he would recommend. This creates an existential crisis for Subaru, as he has no idea what he could recommend, since he doesn't know exactly what their tastes are. In the end, he resolves the situation by bringing a book that he really liked at that age. Nagisa thanks him for the thoughtful gesture, mentioning that she's already eager to read it. The food has finally arrived and everyone present gives thanks before eating and gets ready to have dinner together. When it's over, Subaru thinks that he can finally have a moment of peace. But that doesn't happen as the kids start playing all over the house with Kawase, who is the enabler in this situation. The day goes by and night has finally arrived when Hiroto and his siblings say goodbye, wishing him good night, leaving our protagonist protagonist in peace at last. Subaru, feeling peace and tranquility, lies down on the floor to rest, and just at that moment, Haru arrives, who is also tired and wants to sleep curled up next to him. As always, Haru sees everything in a different way, as she was forcibly picked up by two kids who wanted to play with her. As she tries to escape, the little cat is picked up by the smallest girl, and feeling so uncomfortable, she plans to attack until she sees the girl's face, realizing that she is just a little girl. Remembering the words of her Tora, who always told her to protect the little ones, these words make her give up on her attack. Later, the cat picks up a familiar scent, so she goes out to check, finding the same family that used to feed her when she lived on the street. They are very happy to see that the poor little cat is living in a good place with a nice family. After this, the day goes on, and the cat has to keep putting up with all the kids who want to play with her. He even ends up hiding in various boxes to avoid being bothered by the group of kids. Hearing that everyone has left, Haru, like her owner, is exhausted. Seeing that Subaru is sound asleep on the floor, she decides to join him, settling on top of him to sleep peacefully, as his scent and warmth make her feel safe. The protagonist continues writing the epilogue of his novel next day, but he's completely blanked with no idea what to write, so he decides to look for a reference book. While searching, he notices that Haru is sleeping on top of all of them, so he decides to grab one without waking her up so the little cat can keep sleeping peacefully. Subaru lies down to read the book, but in the process he ends up falling completely asleep. In his dreams, he remembers his childhood and how he used to talk with his mother and father about his favorite book and all the secrets surrounding it. One day his mother introduces him to some new neighbors who have a son the same age as him. Interestingly, that boy is Hiroto, an outgoing kid who loved to play soccer, which is the complete opposite of our protagonist, who is an antisocial book lover. One day, Hiroto has to stay at home with Subaru, since the protagonist's mother promised to take care of Hiroto for a day. That afternoon, a friendship is born between the two boys, where a very curious Hiroto asks him if he wants to be a librarian because of the huge number of books he owns. But Subaru replies that he would like to be a writer, and that's why he reads so much. Sometime later, when Subaru has already started university, his mother asks him how it's going. She also adds that she wants to know how the book he's writing is going to end, as she's very excited to find out the ending. This makes the protagonist feel embarrassed, as he didn't know that his mother was secretly reading his works, and even his father has read them, adding that everything he writes is very interesting. Upon learning all this, Subaru goes to his room feeling very embarrassed, and in the middle of the night, he gets enough inspiration, finish the novel. Weeks later, his novel was awarded by a publishing house, which led to him being hired as a full-time writer, and his parents are very proud of the achievement their beloved son has accomplished. Just at that moment, Subaru wakes up from his dream upon hearing a loud commotion in the kitchen. When he goes out to check, he finds Hiroto on the floor, while Haru is yelling at him from a distance. Seeing him, Subaru asks why he's in his house. Hiroto, embarrassed, says he stepped on Haru's tail, causing her to scream. Subaru notices a forgotten book he lent Hiroto. Subaru doesn't remember until Hiroto mentions his obsession with books, reminding him of getting soaked to save one. The protagonist decides to help him pick up the things he brought, noticing a book that belongs to him, but he had completely forgotten that he lent it to Hiroto. Hiroto reminds Subaru of the time in middle school when he borrowed a book to read to his little siblings. However, Subaru doesn't remember anything about it at all, until his friend clarifies that when it comes to books, he becomes a fool. He also reminds him of the time he got completely soaked just to save a book he was reading. This other event Subaru doesn't remember either. It seems he has forgotten a big part of his childhood. Hiroto and Subaru reminisce a bit about the past and how Subaru found it very strange, but in the end, he grew fond of it. Subaru doesn't remember this other event either. Apparently, he has forgotten a large part of his childhood. Hiroto and Subaru reminisce a little about the past and how Subaru found it very strange, but in the end, he ended up becoming fond of it. While they talk, the protagonist feeds Haru to coax her down from the shelf, which makes Hiroto think about what he would save first between a book and his precious cat. After thinking about it for a moment, he ultimately decides that he would clearly save the cat. Suddenly, Haru jumps on him, causing him to fall to the floor. Thanks to this fall, Subaru ends up fainting in front of a worried Hiroto, and at night, Subaru wakes up to the surprise of finding himself with Kawase and Hiroto, who have been taking care of him tirelessly all day. bringing him medicine and keeping an eye on him. Even Hiroto teases Kawase, pointing out that he looks like a mother taking care of her little child. Subaru is left alone while his friends are cooking. At that moment, Haru comes over, lies on top of him, and falls asleep. This makes the protagonist reflect on everything that's happening, remembering that before, the house was sad and empty. But now it's much more colorful and warm because of all the wonderful people who have come into his life. After thinking about all this, the protagonist falls completely asleep. Now let's switch to the cat's perspective, as we see that Haru, noticing our protagonist sleeping, gets the idea to bring him some food so he can eat when he wakes up. She heads over to the food to grab some, but while trying to take it down from a shelf, she accidentally knocks the can over, creating a mess. At that moment, Roto arrives, startling the cat and making a loud noise, which wakes Subaru up. Next, the protagonist calls Haru to come into his arms. At first, she doesn't plan to listen to him, but after some insistence, she gives in, landing on Subaru's head and causing him to faint from the impact. Later, the cat approaches the protagonist to lie down next to him, wanting to protect him as if he were a small child, settling on top of him while gently stroking his face until she falls deeply asleep. Several weeks have passed for Haru, and this morning Subaru woke up very early and starts getting dressed very elegantly to go out. The protagonist leaves extra food for her and before leaving says goodbye very coldly, which makes the cat very angry. Haru, now alone at home, plans to rest in front of the window until he is called by the neighbor's dog. The dog wants to play with the little cat because his owners have left the house and he has no one to play with. Haru ignores this request and wonders what it feels like to be alone until he falls asleep. Several hours have passed until she wakes up and notices that there is absolutely no one in the house, which worries the little cat since she is hungry and her bowl is completely empty. The more she wanders around the house, the more she misses Subaru's presence. In her mind, can't stand this idea, but when she sees the futon, she lies down on it because it smells like her protagonist. This makes her fall asleep, and at night she is awakened by the sound of the door. But when she goes to check, she is greatly disappointed to realize that her Varu hasn't come back. It was just her neighbors. This feeling of disappointment makes her end up getting stressed, which causes her to destroy the whole house, creating a huge mess. Meanwhile, the protagonist is at a bookstore for a book signing event, as he was finally convinced by Kawase. Seeing the number of people in the audience, Subaru has a panic attack, but in the end, he manages to calm himself down and starts the event. Little by little, people keep coming by, making him feel a bit more comfortable signing books for the various fans. However, he still feels frustrated that he can't express himself comfortably, till a little boy arrives who reminds him a lot of himself when he was younger. This very nervous boy extends his hand to greet him, saying that he loves all of his works. This sparks something in our protagonist, who opens up, stands up from his chair, and thanks the boy for his support. The book signing continues in a better way until it comes to an end, where Kawase congratulates him for all the effort he has put in throughout the day. He steps out of the bookstore to check if there are any readers left who want an autograph. While he is left alone, the protagonist thinks about how beautiful his life has become, noting that it has regained its color. But in the end, he starts to remember Haru and worries because she has been home alone for a long time. While he was thinking, Kawase arrives indicating that there is one last girl missing, so Subaru gets ready. The girl comes in mentioning that her younger brother is a big fan of his work, so she came for an autograph to give it to him as a gift. When Subaru sees her face clearly, he is surprised to realize that it's Nana. He starts to feel a bit of panic, fearing that she might be disappointed with his behavior the last time they met. However, opposite happens, as Nana starts to apologize, and now you understand her way of acting when I talk to her about the book. Hearing this, the protagonist opens up, thanking her for those words from last time, as they made him very happy to know that other people also talk about his literary works. Kawase observes the entire conversation, wondering what kind of relationship these two kids have. Subaru signs Nana's book. The girl politely says goodbye by turning around. The protagonist decides to shout out his thanks for coming, since he forgot to say it when they were face to face, which makes the girl very happy, and she gives him a warm smile. Now alone, Subaru decides to thank Kawase for convincing him to go to the event. He He also hopes they can keep working together, sealing their bond with a handshake. This touches Kawase, as he was only used to Subaru's cold demeanor. The day has ended, and our protagonist arrives home to find everything completely destroyed. He thinks that a thief has broken into the house, and while searching for Haru all over the place, he ends up finding her tangled up. Upon taking a closer look at the crime scene, he realizes that it wasn't a thief after all, but his cat, due to the various bite and scratch marks all over the mess. The cat remembers that it was hungry, so it gestures to the protagonist to feed it. Subaru feeds her, and Haru eats to her heart's content, which makes all his anger and sadness fade away. A new day has arrived, and Subaru receives a message from Hiroto, who tells him that it's his brother and he and his friend are going to come over to play with Haru. This message had been there since the day before, which meant he hadn't rejected the offer, and before he knew it, there were two kids knocking on his door. The kids bring homemade food as a gift for Subaru, something that the protagonist greatly appreciates since he was very hungry. Also, Hiroto told the kids that this is the best gift they could give to Subaru. The little girl asks Subaru for permission to prepare food for Haru, and even brings the necessary things for the preparation. The protagonist thinks about it for a moment, but he ends up agreeing, leaving a lovely smile on the girl's face. The preparation has started, and the girl shows herself to be very skilled, but she has to be interrupted because Haru is being nosy in the kitchen. The food is served for everyone at the table, and as they eat, Subaru thanks them for the meal because it tastes amazing. Hiroto's little brother, very curious, asks the protagonist if he doesn't like to eat, which really worries his older brother. Subaru, upon hearing this, replies that he can't eat like he usually does because he postpones it during work hours. The girl mentions that it also happens to her at the restaurant during the nighttime, which forces her to eat alone. This went on until Haru showed up during her street cat days to liven up all his dinners. The protagonist, upon hearing all this, clarifies that she cooks really well, which brings back memories of his mother. When he was cooking, he remembers the times he didn't take the opportunity to tell her that she had a good touch in the kitchen, simply because he wanted to be a cold and indifferent man. Kids say goodbye. Protagonist asks for a cat recipe. They agree. Before they leave, he asks for help with a recipe for Haru, as he also wants to start cooking homemade food for his little cat. The kids, surprised, agree to give him a recipe the next day, and once Subaru is alone, he starts tidying up the kitchen, reminiscing about the lovely moments he had with his family. The next morning, everything happens as usual, with the little Haru being very lively. But when the protagonist checks the mail at his house, he finds the physical recipe for the cat, leaving him very intrigued to give it a try. Subaru is very determined, so he heads to the supermarket. Once he's there, he feels really nervous since it's been a long time since he was in a place like that, which makes him feel quite embarrassed, especially since a little girl makes him feel even more shy. Upon seeing the recipe book, the protagonist has to go through various challenges at the market, like a crowd of housewives dealing with discounts and being bothered by the store vendors, which ends up making him buy more things than he actually needs. All these situations leave Subaru feeling very overwhelmed until he is found by Hiroto, who starts helping him to get by. Hiroto calls his brother to explain the recipe to him, helps him return the unnecessary groceries, and even takes him home. Our protagonist thanks him for the help from the bottom of his heart, and when he gets home, Subaru starts cooking the food, having trouble cutting the ingredients because he doesn't know exactly the size they should be. This leads him to measure the kitten's snout, an idea that obviously fails and forces him to use cat food as a measuring tool. The protagonist continues with the recipe, very motivated, as he won't let himself be outdone by a little girl. After an incredible journey in the kitchen, the protagonist has finished all the food. Subaru serves Haru her plate of food, where she happily eats. Once the cat finishes eating, she settles on top of the protagonist to keep him company while he eats. Now we switch to Haru's perspective, and we see that she's very worried because Subaru just keeps sleeping and isn't eating anything at all. When the kids arrived with the food, Haru was very anxious because of the smell, so she kept wandering around the kitchen until the protagonist shooed her away, which made Haru angry. After a while, Haru hears the call to eat and runs out to quickly devour her plate. When she finishes, she thinks that the protagonist still hasn't eaten anything, so she gets worried, but she's surprised when she approaches and sees a bunch of food on the table. The next day, Haru is still worried about the protagonist's health, but when she notices that he is cooking for the first time, she has a lot of doubts. Still, she tries to guide him towards the food, but Subaru simply ignores her. This leaves the cat very exhausted until she notices that they've served her food with the same smell as yesterday. At first, Haru decides to wait for Subaru to eat first, but she can't resist for long when she sees that Subaru has his own plate, which reassures her and allows her to eat more calmly. The next morning, Kawase informs Subaru that his work has been awarded, which means it's time to start a new light novel. Kawase leaves, leaving our main character all alone, who is completely blank because he has no inspiration at all. Subaru decides to go out to the garden to take care of it a bit, while he continues to analyze the whole situation, hoping an idea will come to him. He gets so distracted that he forgets he's watering the plants, which ends up soaking his neighbor's dog. Noticing this, Subaru approaches to apologize, and the neighbor takes the opportunity to confess that she has already watered the plants in the morning and that she has been doing it since his mother passed away. Upon hearing this, the main character Wei understands why his garden wasn't wilting even when he didn't take care of it at all. His neighbor also tells him that his mother took great care of his garden for him, explaining that the blue flowers he's seeing were planted by his mother, thinking of Subaru and his fondness for the color blue. She just wanted to see him happy and did this after every trip. In the end, his neighbor says goodbye as she's going to take her little dog for a walk, leaving Subaru alone, who starts to analyze the plants and how beautiful they are. Upon entering the house, he notices that Haru isn't around, so he starts looking for her in every corner. While he was doing this, he notices a shadow at the door, and when he goes out to check, he finds Kawase, who tells him that a boy had passed by calling his name. Thinking it's a relative, lets him in. Subaru thinks about it for a moment since only Hiroto and he have that kind of trust. Just at that moment, Hugo, Nana's younger brother, walks in, bowing in a gesture of respect. The boys invite him in, and they all sit together to have some tea. This is where Hugo starts to speak, apologizing again to the main character for almost hitting him last time. He also mentions that his sister told him that he is the author of the books she loves so much. Hugo thanks him for writing those books, as they have encouraged him to try new things and have given him the courage to face life. This leaves Subaru captivated, as he gets lost in thought for a while, because of Hugo's beautiful words. After tea, Hugo has to leave, so he says goodbye. Once Kawa is alone with the main character, he asks how the ideas for the new book are coming along, but noticing his worried expression, he presents an idea. He suggests going out so that Subaru can change his surroundings and see things from a different perspective. Subaru views this proposal positively and accepts it, which leaves Kawase a bit surprised. He asks Subaru to let him know when he has decided on the destination so they can coordinate the logistics of the trip. His editor leaves, leaving Subaru alone, so he starts to think about what destination he could go to. When he goes out to check on the plants, he notices a pot that hasn't bloomed. Apparently, his mother had something planned for that pot. Upon examining it closely, he finds a note, realizing it was meant to be planted on her last trip, but as we know, never returned. The main character quickly contacts Kawase, telling him the destination so he can get to work on coordinating the trip and accommodation. Following this, Kawase, somewhat worried, asks what he will do with Haru since the little cat gets stressed when she's alone for too long. The main character hadn't thought about that, but he will look for a solution. The next day, after consulting with Nana, she suggested taking Haru to a pet hotel. Subaru decides to put him in the carrier to take him along, but Haru, noticing his intentions, refuses to get in, thinking they're taking him to the vet like last time. Subaru bribes him with some food, managing to get him inside, but when he closes it, Haru's tail gets stuck, causing her to make a fuss and escape from the carrier. Since this plan didn't work, Subaru has to use plan B, asking Hiroto to take care of Haru for a while, feeding her 3 times a day and visiting at least once to make sure everything is okay. Just as he was explaining the plan to Hiroto, he receives a call from Kawase to let him know that the hotel is already booked. While writing it down, he remembers that it was the same hotel his mother had booked before her next trip. Very early in the morning, Subaru travels to his destination. Upon arriving at the hotel, he is warmly welcomed by the receptionist, who asks if he had made a reservation for 3 people. Here ago, since his last name is quite unusual. The main character confirms it, clearing the young lady's doubt, but once he's alone, starts to think about his mother, wondering what she would have wanted to to see in this place. He goes out to do a little investigating on his own, finding brochures about a type of indigo painting. The person in charge of showing him explains the indigo technique, which tends to use different shades of blue. This piques Subaru's curiosity, making him think that his mother came here motivated by him, since she always liked this color. While he strolls around, he researches the techniques of blue indigo dyeing on fabrics. While in the central square, he sees various blue flags, which triggers a wave of memories where his mother praised this color. With the boy's clothes, Subaru feels very nostalgic, and that night in his room, he feels much calmer. Subaru misses petting Haru to relax, while Haru, all alone at home, misses and worries about her owner, but she assumes he will return the next day, so she keeps sleeping. The next day, before returning home, our main character decides to buy some seeds to plant in his garden. The hotel staff responds that it will be difficult to get to the flower shop due to the bad weather. An elderly woman overhears the entire conversation and decides to help him by giving him some seedlings from her garden. Subaru arrives at the airport, surprised to find that the flights have been cancelled due to the storm. Desperate, the main character decides to take the last bullet train to get back home. During the journey, he contacts Kawase to inform him of the situation and asks him to check on his cat if he gets the chance. Meanwhile, Haru is at home worried about Subaru and remembering how terrible the storms were during her time as a stray cat, which makes her even more anxious. At that moment, notices the door opening. When he goes to check, he sees Hiroto soaked, struggling to close the door against the strong winds. This creates a window of opportunity for Haru, who decides to go out on her own, look for Subaru, and escapes. As soon as Subaru arrives in the city, Hiroto calls him to let him know that Haru has escaped and he doesn't know what to do. The main character takes charge of the situation, telling Hiroto to stay home since Haru might decide to come back at any moment. Seeing his surroundings, Subaru notices that a near accident almost happens, which heightens his worry that Haru might get hurt or something worse. The cat, on her part, searching for her owner, wandering through the gardens. Meanwhile, Subaru runs home, searching every corner in hopes of spotting his beloved pet. Seeing that this isn't working, he also tries asking passersby if they've seen a black cat with a white patch, but no one responds. Desperate, Subaru receives a call from Kawase, who informs him that he's aware of the situation and will stay home so that Hiroto can help with the search since he knows the neighborhood better. Additionally, Kawase suggests that they search the places Haru knows, which gives him an idea about his neighborhood, and he takes off running. Our main character goes to the pet store where Nana works to ask for her help and some advice. Then they start a big search where everyone does their best to find little Haru, checking small spaces and places where she might be hiding. Subaru even passes by the cemetery, the place where he found her, but nothing yields any results. Back with Haru, she has ventured into a forest, but a gust of wind causes her to fall into the water canal. As she tries to climb back up, she can't manage it because she can't scale the wall, which leaves her very scared. Not knowing what to do, she curls up waiting to be rescued. In the end, a glimmer of hope appears when Haru hears Subaru shouting her name. Haru, without thinking twice, starts meowing until she is found. Our protagonist follows the sound and finds his little pet shivering with cold, but as he tries to grab her, he falls into the canal, getting completely dirty. Holding her in his arms, Subaru hugs her while crying, and at that moment, his friends find them and help them out along with Haru. When they return home, everyone is okay. Kawa prepares a delicious ramen for all the helpers, and they eat happily. At the end of the meal, it's time to leave. Everyone says goodbye to Subaru, and he thanks them for everything they did for Haru. From the kitten's perspective, we see that even though she was in Subaru's arms, she continued to worry about him and his health, ignoring her own situation. We also see how traumatic the bath seemed to her. Back in the present, Subaru enters the house, gently petting Haru and reminisces, remembering everything that has happened since he found her, filled with nostalgia for the drastic positive change she has brought to his life. The next day, dedicates himself to planting the sapling he brought back from his trip in honor of his mother. Then he gets to work on his new literary piece with the main theme being family. He writes with Haru as his vital support center, promising to always take care of her, in his lap or on top of his head.